All right, everybody, welcome back to our Sunday show. We're going to talk about pattern analysis. How you doing, Double B, G-Pave, everybody else? Go ahead and chime in when you're there. What we're going to talk about tonight is pattern recognition, or patterns of life as we talk about it. It's something we do when we look for criminals, and something we, as in what I used to do when we look for terrorists. That's how we find people. There's all kinds of patterns. Some are good, some are bad. Some patterns you need to have and should. And we're going to talk about different types of patterns, how to recognize them, and how to identify them ourselves for our own situational awareness and safety. And joining me tonight, we have David Robertson from DMR Publications. Luke is unavailable. He is settled in. I just haven't been able to get a hold of him. How you doing, David?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
All right. So patterns, one of the things we look at with patterns, I've talked about this on the podcast with baselines, which are a form of patterns, are things we're looking at to identify habits that people have. Criminals use this all the time when they profile people, what they want to do to break into a place. When are you there? When are you leaving? How do you park your car? Does the way you park your car tell them something about the day of the week? And those are the things we're going to look at. The 1-2 punch, Double B says, yes, it is. So we're going to look at different types of patterns. And David is here to talk about patterns as well, as he has education and training in homeland security and personal security. And if Luke was here, we'd, of course, be able to use him when it comes to law enforcement point of view. But David, why don't you tell us a little bit, based on your training with homeland security and personal security, how patterns play in, both good and bad?
Well, I think that patterns, generally speaking, from not only a security standpoint, but also, for instance, terrorism, counterterrorism, you've got a situation where your patterns kind of give or what do we want to say? They want to kind of give up your intentions in some cases, where you've been, what you've done. It actually can. I don't know. I think ultimately you can tell people a lot of things about everything that you're doing and where you're going and what you're trying to do. So I guess it kind of depends on what side of that fence you're trying to be on. But yeah, it can be very telling.
Oops, they're saying we have an echo, so I'm not sure why that is. That's unfortunate. It seems like every week I have an issue on this thing. I fix it, then I have a new one. And I got to figure that out. I think I can solve this echo thing here as long as I pay attention to what I'm doing. So one of the things I wanted to encourage everybody to do when we talk about situational awareness and these patterns are to take a look at yourself in order to not only follow the whole idea of being gray, being less noticeable, but one thing to do would be to get a notebook if you can, write down every single thing you do, everything. This is when I got up today, not things you do inside your house, not necessarily things you do inside of a building, but traveling or things outside of the ordinary. Here's when I leave my house. Here's when I start the car. I went back in the house. I stopped at this place. Here's the route I take. Don't change anything. Do it for a week or two, the same stuff you normally do. And start looking for those patterns. Maybe you don't leave at the exact same time every day, but you leave within a 30-minute window. So something along those lines, and figure out the patterns you have, and then figure out which ones you can change and why, because some of them you can't change. If you've got to go to work at a certain time, unless you're going to leave real early, you can't really break that. But you can break the pattern of the path that you take. You can choose that if you always go to groceries or go to church at the same time and take the same route, you can change the route or change the time. You can go get groceries at 3 o'clock on a different day. Figure out if you were going to be targeted, if you were going to target yourself, if you're going to rob your own house, if you were going to attack you, what are the things that you were doing? This is kind of what we do when we track terrorists. We look down the patterns of life. What do they do? When do they go outside? When we watched bin Laden and we watched all those surveillance videos, we looked at how many people were outside when, which paths did they walk, who was smoking, who was using a cell phone. And it was difficult to do because of the way they had the house. They structured extra roofs over it to hide how many people were there. We were able to track through satellites and surveillance the heights of people and their gaits to try to figure out if they only wanted us to see there was 2 people or 2 women, that there was actually more than that. That's how we knew how many people were there. And you got to look at your own self that way. When do you get the mail? Do you always park your car, walk back and get the mail? Do you drive up to the mailbox, pull it out, then pull in? Do you come out and get it at a different time? Those are things people can count on. What are the things people can count on as your habits that you can break or change? Now, that being said, looking at patterns, David, give us some ideas of patterns or things people do every day that would be things they probably should change that would make them an easy target.
That's a good question. All right. So can you hear me okay? Okay. Let's see here. Patterns that they might want to change. Social media postings. That would be a big one. Routes that you take, routes that you walk, and this is especially true if you happen to be carrying cash, money, whatever. Like, say for instance, you're in a situation where you're coming from the business, or maybe you handle money and you've got to deposit it. Your patterns. If I know, for instance, that you're handling cash, your patterns, your habits make you vulnerable. That was something that we've had to train a lot of companies on. Trying to tell them mix that up, change that up, do something a little bit different. Also too, like how you handle paydays or grocery store habit, all these things. Anything that, especially where you've got something that somebody else might want. You want to change your pattern up in just about any way. Sorry, I'm seeing a little bit of a delay, so I'm not entirely sure if how this is coming across. So sorry.
No, it's all right. I see some of it too. So that's just one more thing I got to figure out this week. One of the patterns I always talk to people about is, when you do, say, passwords or PIN numbers, like on, you got to use a 4-digit PIN to sign in online. People always say, don't use the same ones or use these different systems. I always talk to people about ATM pins because most people don't see what you're doing in ATM, but we use those all the time now to checkout aisle. And the thing is, no matter what your numbers are, for what reason, people don't notice that. But what people can do is see you typing it in. They can see the pattern. And if you follow a specific pattern where you just go like this, say you go one here, one to the right, one down, and one back up, there's only so many places on the keyboard that could play into it. And if they're watching what you're doing, all they can do is make one or two guesses to where if they get a hold of your card, they can figure out what your PIN is. And while they won't likely get caught if they use an ATM machine, they can take your card and use that to spend money because all you need is the PIN. That's one of the dangers of a debit card people don't think about. Who can see what you're doing and you're typing in? Is the person that's charging you, that's going to give you a receipt, can they see what you're typing in? Can they see your fingers follow a certain pattern? When's the last time you changed that PIN number? Just like when's the last time you changed a password? Every time you hear something, even if you only change passwords as a security leak, or they say, hey, your stuff might have got leaked, you should change your password. That's a memory. That's a time you should remember that you need to change that PIN number too, because it doesn't take much to see that pattern of what you do. Another thing to look at too, like with routes you drive, think about this. When you pull into a grocery store parking lot and there are tons of vehicles, tons of places to park, but it's pretty packed. Are you like most people and you actually come in the same entry point and drive the same pattern path looking for a place to park? That's not a good idea. People can count on exactly what you're doing, and those are patterns you want to break. Let's see. We got any questions out there? We do not have any questions yet. How are you doing? Grumpy, HRM Weapons Machinist. Deb, nice to see you. Nice to see that Deb's back in the house and the show today. Hopefully Luke sees this and gets the hint that I can't get through to him on text. I'm getting his, but he's not getting mine. We're trying to get him on. One of the things about patterns too, when we look at like investigations, criminal investigations, I wanted to have Luke on for this. I talked about this on a podcast about how with baselines, but it's patterns. When they investigate, say, a crime scene, there's certain things they look for that are habitual patterns, not just baselines of the situation, but these things tend to mean this. There's a pattern here. We know that because it was broke into this way, the crime happened this way, the body was found this way, whatever it was, likely it profiles this type of person. It's because while that person who committed that crime might be their first time, other people have done that before. So something about patterns is not just the pattern that you set or you see in other people, realize there's patterns other people follow that you don't follow every day, but you follow when it arises. It's like driving on the freeway. I know people, when they drive on the freeway, they don't really speed. They do the speed limit, and that's how they drive all the time. But if they have to travel cross country, they really want to get there. And they do what other people do at those times, as infrequent as it is, and they floor it trying to get there. Or just like people that use radar detectors, looking for police, thinking that because there's no radar, it's safe to speed or not to drive down this road. They're breaking that pattern because they don't want to get caught. But what they don't realize is they're setting another pattern, usually by following the same habitual route, to avoid a situation. So part of that is to say, one of the things you should be looking for, I've talked about this before, anytime you go into a building, anytime you go into a place, or just pull into a parking lot, you should be looking for multiple exit points for that immediate emergency to drive away or to avoid, say, hitting a person or an altercation, to if something happened and you needed to get out of there, something bad, what are the options you have? While you can see those, one of the things you can do is start exploring those. When you pull in, try pulling in a different way, try driving out a different way and see what the traffic's like at that time where the road goes. When you walk through the grocery store, don't walk in, go to the right to the produce and go all the way to the left and come back. Go the opposite of everybody else. Maybe that makes you stand out a little bit, but do something different. Go to the middle and go out of order of the aisles, even though it's not as good a time getting whatever you want, to avoid setting that same pattern. Because a lot of the patterns, like a grocery store, people don't realize it's like herding sheep. No matter what you think, most people, when they go in and buy their week's groceries, they follow the same pattern of the guys in front of them. They tend to go in from the same direction and do the same thing everybody else does. So a lot of patterns we follow just by following other people, and that's what you got to look out for. David, what are some patterns or things you can think of people might do, not even realizing they're doing it, by following other like large groups of people or the situation at the moment?
Well, you'll see that a lot in emergency situations, especially with, for instance, natural disaster. So when you talk about emergency management situations, can you hear me? Okay. So sorry. So like in emergency management situations, a lot of people will go with what this other person who seems very confident might be doing, or following the crowd, in any situation, chaotic situations. We saw, for instance, in some active shooter scenarios, a lot of people running to the wrong space because everybody else was running there as well. When you factor in the various things you can do in an active shooter scenario, a lot of people will choose the wrong one because other people are doing it. So people will tend to follow for some reason, those who are confident in their decisions. So you got to be careful with that, for sure. But in times of emergency and high stress, that's really where that part's going to play in. Is that kind of what you're referring to?
Yeah, it is. CNC says avoiding simple and subtle patterns of behavior that can also be telling about oneself, furthering the anonymity of the gray man. That's the thing. If you really put the effort in to figure out your patterns, or maybe you just want to watch somebody else, but watch somebody that's not going to be weird, like somebody you live with, figure out those patterns, you'll be surprised at the things that if somebody close to you that you've kind of knew subconsciously, but you'll start seeing differences or changes that they'll make. You'll start figuring out how expansive those patterns can be. But the thing is it's easy to see the big ones. It's easy to identify when a person pulls out and goes to work or goes to the grocery store. It's easy to see this guy always does yard work at 8 a.m. on Saturday. It's easy to see those. The subtle ones are the ones that are a little more different. Then you'll start picking up on things about, oh, well, this person's leaving the house at this time like they normally do, and I never consciously realized that they're always dressed in a certain style of clothing, but now it's dramatically different. Something must have changed. So one thing to remember is, while you can have chaos, which isn't a bad thing, in other words, not establishing or setting patterns, you're going to have some, and somebody's going to notice it. And when you break that pattern, even the most subtle way, everything's the same about when you left the house, but there's something different about your clothing. Somebody who sees that every day at the same time realizes there's something different. We see in TV shows all the time. It's like the sitcom show, and the guys are pulling out, going to work, and they say hi to each other every day, and then they notice something simple. Oh, you're wearing a polo shirt today. Something simple, and they want to know what's going on. It's because they notice that change in your pattern. There's something about your pattern where 5% of it's changed and somebody notices, and then you have to realize that is something else. Breaking your patterns can be just as noticeable. So you need somewhat of an erratic consistency. Like, what can you kind of change without changing everything? Can you park a different way so people can't see how you're getting in a car if you want to avoid that conversation? Can you change how you park your car every time? Can you leave at erratic times but within a 30-minute window? So that over time, over that 30-minute window, you can see whatever other patterns everybody else has and build those up. It might take a little longer, but not always the same people seeing you. So they're not sure when you go to work or why. And if they think about it, causes them to think other things, like you have a different work schedule or you're going somewhere else. It's common, like seeing people in the military. They could be going to work every day at 4:30. Sometimes they'll go at different times over a half-hour period because they know what traffic's like that day, or they know they got a promotion recently and they have to be there earlier. Try to be like that. Change it up a little bit in a window. Work within the window. Don't go from 7:30 to 7:45. Go from 7:30 to 7:50 to 7:41. Make it erratic so that there is some consistency there for you that you can count on, but you can avoid setting that pattern that people might notice that's going to give them the idea that, oh, this pattern change stands out. Let's see what we got here. Oh, didn't scroll down. Yeah, here's something. David, on that active shooter that happened out there in Boulder, did you notice anything about that was different in the pattern of behavior of the people that were present during the shooting, or the pattern of behavior of the shooting itself, or maybe in the first responders' actions?
Well, yes and no. It's funny. Every active shooter scenario has its own personality, its own thing about it, and everybody kind of responds differently to the sounds and to the actions. It's really kind of alarming, just how some people respond to those situations. And it's one of those things where, and it's a good point. I see that the last, people standing around seemingly are not concerned at all about what's going on. Because, is this happening? Is this really going on? Should I be alarmed? And when we hear things like that, we tend to, and this is a problem, we'll look around at the reactions of others and then have a reaction accordingly, and that can be a problem. That can be a big problem, and I think we saw some of that where the confusion became infectious. And that's something we have to be careful of, which actually kind of ties into Adam Frazier's question. I don't know if you saw that, but he says, where's the balance between avoiding following the crowd and following patterns when not doing so may completely eliminate being Grayman because you stand out so drastically? Well, in situations that are drastic and are unfolding in rapid time, it's one of those things that if everybody's fleeing in a direction, you're not so dissimilar, but you're also not following the crowd. I mean, so there is something that can be done there where that medium can occur. Go ahead. Sorry, it looked like you were going to say something.
I was just reading the comments and thinking, yeah, one thing about that is to understand you can't do it 100% all the time. That's just not going to happen when it comes to being gray. So you might have to float in and out of it by the second or by the day, and identify the situation is best going to work to your advantage and to your safety. So if you think an actual crowd, let's say you're downtown and a crowd shows up, not a riot or anything, there just happens to be a festival, or say you're going to a concert. There's times to your advantage when moving with the flow of people in and out of a large, say a stadium, for example. You can't really fight it if you want to get anywhere unless you're going to sit on the sidelines and wait it out. But if you learn how to move through that crowd and navigate it, you can actually kind of get ahead of people if it's, say, just you or one other person. And same way people go to concerts and they just kind of slowly meander through and get their way to the front. But then when that's no longer working to your advantage or you don't feel safe anymore, then you can move out of the system of what the crowd's doing. So maybe using, say, the grocery store example. There's a big sale, going to be tons of people going today you want to go to and take advantage. You may very well have to go with the crowd and the flow of traffic, getting in there and parking and even getting through the doors. But once you're in there, you then have to decide based on the lay of the land and what you can foresee, whether it's physical distance or time. Where can I take advantage of this situation and either do something different than the crowd is doing or do something with the crowd? And whether you're going with the crowd or against the crowd doesn't make it any more or less anonymous. It just depends on whether or not you stand out. Somebody's always going to notice you. That's the one thing people don't realize. To live the total life, to really be a Grayman, to live like a spy does, who lived abroad doing a job, that is all you do 24/7. You don't have family ties. You don't hang out with your family. You don't go do movies unless it's part of your job. Every movement is planned. Your life is planned. And everything is about surveillance and counter-surveillance. You can't live that way in the everyday life, especially if you have a family or a real job. You'll lose your mind. So you look at these regular situations and figure out, like I said earlier, the erratic consistency. Is this large group chaos, as we'd call it, or is it's like a school of fish? Is there a pattern that makes sense to it? And how can I use it to my advantage? Just remember, you flow in and out of it constantly. It's not going to be 100% of the time. It's going to be a question of sometimes moment to moment, sometimes hour to hour. What's the best thing that I can do that can make it work to my advantage? Now, David, this might be something you can address. The global pandemic was a motive to decay the global economy and to realign trade structure in China's favor once again. I don't want to address. So I want to say before I address this question, because I'll pull it up again. I've already put up next week's show for those of you who want to watch it. We're going to talk about everyday carry. But as soon as this show's over, because these shows are meant to only be an hour, I'm going to do an unscheduled live one after a short break. David will be on that one too, and we're going to answer questions like that. But we'll answer your question, HRM, on the next show if you're around, but I want to answer it in this way for the patterns. One of the things about patterns like this, and this isn't a knock on you, is statements like this are the ones that come out during any event, almost like conspiracy, whether it is or not. One of the patterns we can see in this is that there's many ways to look at it, but we see countries like China and Russia as big bad evils. Therefore, anything that happens with them, we see it as a consistent pattern. Recent podcast I did talked about cyber espionage strategy. Now, we look at China and Russia and often get it wrong. We confuse the two countries. And we tend to, either because of the way we believe or the media we consume or something we read or some conspiracy site, we follow this pattern of going, oh, this label's on it, therefore it's this. Oh, it's the Republicans, it must be this. It's the Democrats, it must be this. It's China, it must be this. It's Al-Qaeda, it must be this. And most people are wrong most of the time. And I'm not saying you're wrong in that, but that's kind of how I wanted to look at it. What I wanted you to do, David, we'll address this question in its context in the next, after this part, but I was wondering if you could take that based on the pandemic and the economy, however you want to explain it, the way that there are consistent patterns on how you forecast things based on events, just like even a year ago, we talked a couple of days ago, yesterday, about a year ago, what we were trying to forecast based on patterns because of the pandemic, and we were wrong. We were wrong, but we were right. We were guessing early, telling each other, no, it's not going to happen in 6 weeks. It's way too early, and it'd be like 2 weeks later. What kind of patterns have you seen that you can count on if let's say a new pandemic happened or a new war happened? What are the patterns you look for that you know that's probably going to be there every time?
So it's funny because, yeah, we were right and we were wrong. It was interesting. I went to a government affairs committee, was it last week? And it was one of the things where they had kind of stopped and they said, well, let's ask David, he got it right on the last time. Cause, he basically what had happened is I was watching this new disease hit various towns and I saw it coming our way. And so when we see it in various towns and we see the response in the towns and it's getting closer and closer and closer to you, I mean, it's like a wave. You can see a wave coming if you're watching it. You can see and hear a train coming near you if you listen and feel. And you can do the same thing in a lot of ways with, for instance, like right now, one of the things that's on the radar on the West Coast is an Ebola. There's several Ebola cases that have broken out on the West Coast. And so, when we watch it, if this progresses and we start to see more cases, flowing to the east, we can probably see some interesting or we can come up with, I think, some interesting correlations and projections there. Same thing with war or anything else. When we watch the wave, and that's the biggest part of guessing, or I guess projecting in some cases, is watching the progression and tracking the progression. And that's unfortunately not something a lot of people are familiar with or patient enough to do or whatever, but it's watching the wave come to you, and then trying to it's almost applying statistical analysis to it to see what are probabilities and viabilities, I guess, in those situations. Does that make sense?
No, it does make total sense. And part of the reason I wanted to address that was, I think, like, going back to like what he said, a lot of things what people pay attention to are big things we see every day. Something that's important to us, usually big: politics, wars, the pandemic. We don't pay attention to these little everyday things. And it should show you how easy it is to get distracted by things other than yourself, but how easy it is to draw conclusions. Whether or not he's right or anybody's right about it, I don't think the everyday person has enough information out there. But one of the things to show you is, no matter what your view is on big subjects, we naturally are going to make presumptions and assumptions about everything, which means when people look at you every day and everything you do, they're going to make presumptions and assumptions about you based on those patterns that you have. People presume that if the family gets in a car Sunday morning before, say, 10 o'clock and they're well-dressed, they're going to church. But I know families that do that don't go to church at all. And it freaks people out when they find out that's not the case. So it's a question of figuring out, what assumptions would somebody make? What are fair assumptions a reasonable person would make, or person you're concerned about your behaviors? What assumptions do you make every time you pull into a gas station, every time you walk into a building or a store, every time you come into work? What assumptions do you make about the people or the environment based on what's happening? You see this guy with a look on his face drinking his coffee a certain way, and you say, oh, it's going to be one of those kind of days. I saw that in the military all the time. Guys show up, go out for PT, to have a look on his face, speak a certain way. Oh, this must have happened last night. We know what kind of day this is going to be. Now, even if we were right, we were still making an assumption. But we were doing our presumption based on a pattern, a habitual pattern we could count on. But that means people are making those same presumptions about you. And some of those people are going to be bad actors. They're going to be bad people. Somebody's going to try and take advantage of you at some point. We always think it's never going to be us. But that's what happens to most people. I don't think anybody in that mass shooting thought it was going to happen to them ever, let alone that day. Just like people coming home finding out their house has been broken into. Or that picture I share on Facebook with all the bumper stickers on it and people trash on it thinking it's unrealistic, although it comes from criminals. People see those stickers on your car and they see, oh, you've got 2 kids and your kid's an honor student at this school, which means I can go online and find out what they're doing in school and when they're in school. And, oh, you have an NRA sticker. You know, guys that put those on their car are like, yeah, you try to take my car, I'll shoot you or something. It's like, no, what they're saying is that you probably have guns in your home. So if they're a thief, they're going to establish your pattern of life for your home and figure out when you're not there. And then they're going to go in and take that because they can move them. So what kind of information are you putting out there? You know, what assumptions do you make on social media? If you follow social media a lot and you see people posting stuff, what presumptions do you make about those people based on what they post or their habits? Do you do it based on time of day? Oh, this person didn't post at this time of day. Something must be wrong. Oh, they posted this. They must be having this kind of a week. Not the ones where they tell you the week they're having, just based on the normal stuff. There's patterns in everything we do, and we have to look at those to determine which ones we can change or adjust. And here's the other thing. Once you figure that out, then you can throw those things out there on purpose to put people in a position to make those presumptions that are completely wrong in order to hide what you're doing. Let's see, what did Grumpy say? Are people more subject to maintaining patterns in their early morning hours due to the fact that their edges aren't up yet? No, I think people are maintain patterns because of how long they've had the patterns. I don't think the time of day matters. I think it's just a question of I don't remember David probably knows the rule, but there's a rule about when you're learning something, you have to do it so many times for it to kind of become a habit. And after so long, like there's all kind of guidance on that. Some of those things we do naturally. So the thing is, I don't know how much it's really going to matter. It may matter a little bit based on where you are, how awake you are, what's in your body, whether it's caffeine, medication, whatever. But the longer held and consistent a pattern is, most of those things I don't think are going to matter. David says he has an interesting answer. So, David, what's your answer for that question?
Okay, so what's interesting about this is people are normally hypnotized twice a day. And the first one is very early in the morning. And it's funny because you'll notice that your morning drive radio is filled to the brim with advertisements. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that people are working on a program. They are shook awake by their alarm clock. They get up, they get around, they're groggy, they're tired. You know, they're just kind of working off, very similar to what Shamer's talking about here, about, you know, just your routine, right? Your pattern, actually. And this is what's so funny about this, because it is your pattern. It's what gets you up. It's what gets you out of the house. And you're also at the same time highly suggestible because you're in that middle ground between very awake and sleep, because you're still groggy. You're still trying to wake up. So you're driving to work. You're highly suggestible. You're not going to be on your game in regard to, you know, being erratic, if you will, wanting to change things up. You're trying to get to work on time or whatever the situation is. So yeah, your patterns in that situation, not only your physical habits, your patterns of how you're going to get to work or how you're going to do this or that, but also to a certain degree, your subconscious patterns are also going to be demonstrated. And the more tired you are, but still active, the more susceptible to that you become. And again, this has been known in marketing and advertising for some time, which is why Morning Drive has so many advertisements. So that's just an interesting way to look at that.
That is interesting, and I think that probably does play in, and that's something you should look at to answer your question. Anybody else out there? Let's see. Is there any chance to start up intellectual debate panel discussions? Well, I guess it depends on what you're meaning. My first thought was when we used to have a bunch of random people on here and we'd fight. When it was me and David and Luke, any of the three of us, I guess they were pretty good debates. A question would be what specifically you're looking for. I think that's what I'm really trying to turn the second hour into when I do a second follow-on show that's not pre-planned. I mean, David and I discuss, and Luke, about shows we want to do. So I guess if you can be more specific on what kind of stuff you're looking for, we could probably even plan one of those. And those are interested. We've talked about it. I think I've talked about it on the podcast in the last video, doing things on China and the Big Five, as David calls them, the economy, some other things, tying them into this show, depending on if it's the main show or the after show or whatever we're calling it. Yeah, so hypnotizing, it's interesting. I didn't realize that, and I think that's a useful piece of information. Something else to consider, too, is when you're looking at patterns for yourself, try to, let's say you have a day off and you don't have to do anything. Try to best your ability, write down, make a list of everything you'd be doing, even though you're not doing it, and see how close you are. So if you got a day off coming, do that before you start tracking yourself for a week or two. See how close you are. How good is your active memory to the behavior that you do? The other thing, too, is when you have a day off, and let's say it's an inconsistent time period of days off that nobody's typically thinks you're off. Like, say you work Monday through Friday, but you got Wednesday off. Plan your day and go do something. You can leave your house at the same time and maintain that pattern around your neighborhood, but you can go out in town and go do some shopping, sightseeing, whatever it is you normally do. If you want to keep that pattern and make people think there's nothing abnormal, your habit hasn't changed. So it can work to your benefit to have habits. Some habits need to be there. Some patterns need to be there. Look at safety. I've used the example before, people that have to follow safety procedures doing, say, labor. Say they're working with metal or machines or tools, driving forklifts. There's patterns and checklists they follow for safety purposes. So patterns aren't always bad. Sometimes they're there to help us and to help us learn things and to not get hurt. But we have to identify, when you find your patterns, what you're trying to do is you're trying to establish, here's all my patterns, the best of my ability. Here's all my patterns, big picture. Then you have to figure out which ones would somebody take advantage of to victimize you, to steal from you, to hurt you, whatever. Those are the ones you want to look at making erratic. You want to change those up a little bit, plus other security features we can talk about another time, but those are the ones you want to look at. Then the other thing is you want to look at your patterns and say, well, which patterns do I want to keep in place when they don't actually exist? So when I have that day off, do I want to keep that pattern of leaving my house at 7:30 in the morning to give my entire neighborhood that idea that my pattern has not changed so that I can go out and do whatever and don't have to talk to them about it later or whatever reason, or so that I can go to another point and watch my house just to see what happens in the neighborhood and they don't know I'm there. There's so many different options on how you can do it. Oh, you enjoyed the diverse opinions on any subject. Yeah, those definitely existed, especially in the days of Jade Helm. Let's see. Thank you, NJ Buick. The band's back together. Well, it's a 2-piece. Normally it's a 3-piece, but the third piece is unavailable. Other patterns we can look at are, if you think about family members, we have family members, whether it's our parents, our kids, our siblings, cousins, somebody, friends, people close to us, or in close institutions. Like, I belonged to this church for years. I know plenty of people there. There's patterns of behaviors these people have and we come to expect from them, and we even hear people make statements like, oh my God, here we go again, stuff like that. When that stuff arises and when you see it in other people or you see it in yourself, you've got to stop yourself and check that and say, is it a pattern or is it a bias? Because there's a difference. It could be that there is a habit there that tends to mean something. But even if it's a pattern, what's your reaction to it? Is your reaction to it a bias? Because if it is, it's going to affect your ability to assess that pattern and take advantage of it. You have to remember, just like a bad guy can take advantage of your patterns to, say, break into your house, for example, you can take advantage of other people's patterns. Part of the whole Grayman theory, I said, appearance is very minimal. Part of it's our behaviors and interactions. When you're talking to people and trying to get information or trying to share information or trying to do anything and say just a conversation, if you've recognized a pattern behavior and realized based on your assessment, they have a habit of this situation based on the time of day, the attitude they're in, whatever story they just told, of behaving this way, you can anticipate that, and then you can have your conversation and take advantage of that pattern they set because you already see it coming. You can war game in your head while they're telling you this story. I wanted to have this conversation. Now I'm going to have it a little bit differently because I can see this pattern. It's so much more difficult to do when you meet somebody that's in that same situation, but you don't know them well. And a lot of times when we see those situations, we see this person, they behave a certain way, and we go, oh, they're going to do this. Well, we don't know that because that's a new person. We're making that presumption because of patterns we've seen in other people. It could turn out to be right, could turn out to be wrong. You just need to be aware of that. Let's see. Adam Frazier, when traveling to a foreign country and you want to blend in, what are the main notes you take on how to not stand out and become a target? First is research. I research the location, find out where I'm going, time of year, how often people go there, what are the more touristy areas, say it's a tourist or business situation. Do I want to go there and why? Do I not want to go there and why? Based on, am I going to stand out in these areas? What is it about that culture that identifies a tourist? How do they know? Now, they're going to know anyway to a certain degree based on how you talk, how you communicate. You can go to Canada, or Canadians can come here and they're going to know. But it depends on the area you're at. A lot of people aren't going to know. Other things to look at are simple safety and security measures in order to not stand out. You want to know, like I tell people simple things. Say your hotel, for example, you're staying on the 3rd floor. How many steps to the elevator? How many steps to a fire extinguisher? How many steps to the fire exit? Just so you know which way to go, which way's closer, how to access those. Part of it is because if, say, a fire broke out in a hotel in a foreign country and you're there, and it's a tourist hotel, let's say 90% of the people are tourists, people freak out. They don't know. They follow signs. They look for the emergency exits. People panic. If you're more prepared for that situation, whether you stand out because you're calm or not, you'll be able to get out of there more safely. And that's something I look at. Other patterns are just, how do people spend money? Do people tip in restaurants? How do people communicate? You're going to be known that you're not from there. But the more you can learn beforehand about how to behave and interact, the less you'll stand out. Or at least you'll still stand out. But there'll be all these other people over here that didn't prepare, and they're going to stand out more. So you're still going to stand out to some degree, but these people might be a bigger attraction. So that's part of the thing with the patterns or the behavior, the whole Grayman concept. You can't do it 100% all the time. But if you can do it better than the people around you, attention will be drawn to them. It's like I say, you go to the checkout line. Checkout lady's talking to everybody and everybody's chatting her up. You don't do it, you stand out. Is that what you want? Maybe nobody's talking to her, then you choose to. You stand out, but maybe make her day better. It just depends on what you're trying to do. Let's see. David, you might be able to answer this question. I'd like to hear your point of view on that, on disinformation and misinformation, considering all the things you talk about on your podcast, how patterns have a place for that and how it works to their advantage or, say, confuses the subject.
Sure. Yeah, so one of the things that I would encourage everybody to go look at is something called AstroTurf. I've written about it. There are videos about it. And it's not about necessarily at all actually the fake grass. It's a propaganda method, but there's patterns, clear patterns in all of that. And really what they're trying to do is flood information. For instance, let's say you find a paid for study, which is reinforced by a Wikipedia monitored Wikipedia page, which is somehow part of an agenda, which is supported by social media. And then, of course, you're going to have the search engine sites and stuff like that. I mean, everything is going to be geared to try to condition you into a certain idea. And this is a very real situation. It is a multi-billion-dollar industry that is geared towards trying to get people to think a certain way. And about various things. I mean, it could be anything about, a pharmaceutical drug. It could be a vaccine. It could be a political agenda. It could be whatever. It's a big, big situation. So when we talk about patterns of this, I mean, you're gonna see it. It's one of the ways that I should say that I've begun to put up my red flags. Yes, you're gonna hear the charged language. That's always a really big clue, but that's hard to figure out sometimes, especially if you're not used to seeking it out. But if you were to discover, or if you were to notice, for instance, that it is everywhere, like it is just coming out of the woodwork, this narrative. That's a really good example of one of those patterns you can pick up on to say, well, wait a second, is there an opposing view? Is there some contrast to this? And can I discover anything about it? And if you can, that's a great way to approach that.
Yeah, that is. And part of it too, like you're saying, is if you can't figure out what the pattern is or if the pattern's there, you can get rid of the inflammatory language. I tell people get rid of the adjectives. One of the things I do when I work with people, there's guys I'm working with, some that are probably watching right now that work on essentially information teams or intelligence teams that are learning about open source information, trying to find more stuff. And one of the things is telling them, like, you got to go through your source of information. You have to look for the pattern there. Like, you go to a website. It doesn't matter if it's CNN or a blog. Who owns it? Who are they? What other stuff have they written? How does their writing styles work? Are they using sources? What sources of information are they using? And you can identify certain patterns. Like, you'll find people that write things that may sound great, may sound wonderful, might sound what you like, but they don't back it up with anything. It's just parroting things other people are saying. That can be misinformation or disinformation, or they have a lot of sources. But then do you go through and look at those sources? Maybe they're twisting those words, twisting that information. There's a difference between, like, writing a dissertation, what David's doing, we're using source information to either expound on it or challenge it, versus twisting and manipulating it to tell a story in order to say cast yourself as a victim or a hero. There's a big difference in that. So that's kind of the difference between, like, that's more misinformation. Disinformation, I think, is just outright twisting it completely wrong. Oh, let's see. Something I noticed, you have your drapes open and the Grayman sign up. Doesn't concern you. People might use that. They're not open. People can't see in the few inches it's open for my dog to look out. Nobody can see that sign. Nobody can see in this room. My house is set up that way. Even when I open blinds, you can't see anything outside of a few things that would look like any normal, typical house. to see it, they'd have to be trying to break in, which my dog would love that a lot. So I'm not worried about it. You'd have to be here to see it, but I'm not going to tell you where I live to check it out. All right, so here's what we're going to do.
Give you the hint, though.
Oh, go ahead.
The hint for where he lives, I'll tell you, there are polar bears, there are leopards, and giraffes.
And platypus that swims in my pool. All right, so what we're going to do, it is 45 minutes into the show. We're going to end the show right now. Don't forget to, on any YouTube channel, if you're not getting notifications, when you subscribe, go back to the bell and click all. If you didn't click all, it doesn't default there. You won't get them all. In 30 minutes, I'm going to go live. I don't have it pre-scheduled. We're just going to go live in 30 minutes at 15 minutes after the hour for an open question and answer session for those questions that get answered here and those that have other questions outside of this pre-planned subject. And for those who are watching afterwards, if you've got any comments about anything we said, please put them below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you want to hear more, see our upcoming shows. We'll be here every Sunday at 6 p.m. Pacific Time, 9 p.m. Eastern. Thank you all for being here tonight. And stay on here 30 minutes. I'll go live again.